Hi, I'm Danielle Kahn, Vice President of Startup Engagement and the head of Lift Labs at Comcast NBC Universal. We are incredibly proud to be the title sponsor once again of Philly Tech Week. Our company was once a startup itself and continues to value entrepreneurship 60 years later. That's just one of the reasons we're so passionate about supporting founders and startup champions like Technically, especially in our hometown. There is something exceptional about the Philadelphia tech and startup ecosystem that we are proud to be a part of. Our team has been to startup cities all around the world, and none seem to have the same grit, determination, and tenacity as the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Our startup engagement team is the front door for startups looking to do business with Comcast, NBC Universal, and Sky. We connect founders with teams for pilot programs, mentorship, and much more. We especially love working with companies in our own backyard. And we're currently accepting applications for our next Lift Labs Accelerator run in partnership with Techstars. So if you have a startup in media, entertainment, or connectivity, or you know someone who does, check out ComcastNBCUlift.com and submit your application by May 11th. And now I'd like to introduce the keynote conversation for the Introduce conference. Please welcome my good friend, Chris Wink, CEO of Technically, and Sheela Subramanian, an author, VP at Slack, and co-leader of Future Forum, a research consortium on the future of work.
What does a pulse survey of 10,000 global workers say about work right now? We'll hear today in a conversation ahead of the Introduced conference. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically. We're a news organization with a community of technology professionals and entrepreneurs. We are ahead of our conference on May 12th in Philadelphia, hosting a series of conversations around building better companies. We're interested in work trends over the last couple of years and beyond. Today, I am thrilled to be discussing just such trends with Sheela Subramanian. She's the VP of Future Forum at Slack, which is a consortium we're going to hear a bit about and learn what they are hearing from 10,000 or so global professionals. Sheela, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
All right, Sheela, I've been interested also in Future Forum as an entity. So set us up. What is Future Forum? It's quite new, and what are you doing?
Yes, so Future Forum is a consortium. It's backed by Slack, and it's focused on redesigning how work is done to be more flexible, inclusive, and connected. So we've partnered with amazing organizations like Boston Consulting Group, Miller Knoll, as well as Management Leadership for Tomorrow, to figure out how work can work better for all types of people rather than the select few. And we came together in 2020 mainly because we saw thousands of organizations globally doing the lift and shift. They were lifting office-based practices and they were shifting them into people's makeshift offices at home in their living rooms or in bed or whatever that may be. And we realized that this was an opportunity to fundamentally change how we worked from a transition to a transformation. And so Future Forum was born, and we're focused on quarterly research, the Future Forum Pulse, which you mentioned earlier, as well as dialogue with executives. And we can talk more about what that looks like today.
I also would be neglectful to not note that you guys have a new book coming out that I've been quite interested to dig a little into, and that's coming out quite new, right? This is imminent.
It's coming out May 17th, so very, very soon. And How the Future Works, you'll see it behind me, the cover.
Well placed, Sheela. You're a savvy. You're savvy.
How the Future Works is essentially a blueprint for leaders to help guide them on instilling flexible work strategies across their organization. Because one thing we'll talk more about today is that flexible work is not just the number of days you're in the office. It's ultimately also when people work, and it's about choice. What we're seeing in terms of the market, in terms of the great resignation today, is that people want choice in terms of how they work, and they want leaders who are going to trust them and give it to them. And so How the Future Works is a good guide to getting there.
Yes. So backed by both the research you've done to fill in that book, the pulse surveys you're doing quarterly, the other research that you guys have dug real into in the last couple of years. Let's pick up some of these themes is what I'm desperately trying to say. Let's do it. One theme that I picked out in some of the research you've done that is interesting is what you just alluded to, the difference between schedule flexibility and location flexibility. Seems obvious, but maybe talk to me about how they're related and separate. These as concepts when you talk about workplace flexibility, something that we've done quite a bit of review ourselves at Technically.
Yes. So when we talk about flexibility, oftentimes in the news, in executive team meetings,
Are you blaming us in the news, Sheila, already? I'm just teasing.
What's that?
I'm just teasing. I said, you blaming us in the news already, Sheila? I mean,
well, it oftentimes anchors on how many days do you need to go back into the office. Are you going back 3 days a week? Are you going back 2 days a week? And flexibility is way more than that. And what we saw from our research, and this has stayed consistent quarter over quarter, is that schedule flexibility in when you work actually has a higher impact and a better impact on people's overall engagement and experience scores. And what we see from our research is that 94% of employees want schedule flexibility, whereas 79% want location flexibility. And what's been really interesting to see, at least this past quarter, is that while 94% want schedule flexibility, 2/3 of employees are actually not getting it. They are essentially tied to specific hours, usually between 9 to 5, except for the occasional appointment. And what we're seeing is people who don't have schedule flexibility are 3 times more likely to look for a new job in the next year. So it's definitely top of mind for employees right now.
Are you seeing any themes yet in how schedule flexibility works?
Yes.
In practice?
When people hear schedule flexibility, you oftentimes get the deer in headlights response, especially from executives, because what they're envisioning is everybody kind of works whenever works best for them. What most people want actually is guided autonomy or flexibility in a framework. So they want someone to say, all right, our teams are going to come together these 3 hours, Monday through Thursday, and those are our 3 hours, our core team work hours, to collaborate, to discuss really important topics, to make decisions. But outside of that block, you are welcome to do your focused work when works best for you. And the key to that is that over the last 2 years, people have gotten exposure to other elements of life that they didn't really get exposure to when they were working in the office every single day from 9 to 5. They're able to go for walks during meetings. They're able to pick up their kids and see their families more, give them a hug in the middle of the day. And so people want a little bit more flexibility in terms of when they can work. Also because everyone has their own patterns. I'm a night owl as an example. So I get my best work done in the evenings. And giving people that structure in terms of what the expectations are, when they're supposed to work, but also giving them the freedom to figure out when they can do some of their more focused work is actually what the people surveyed want today.
A small example that I think about often, as I will say, a working parent, sometimes working at 10 p.m. was better for me. Working until 10 p.m. is likely a problem. And there's a distinction there that we often muddle, that if it is really about your own flexibility, that's helpful. If it's just sheer more hours, that's an issue of burnout. I feel like that is I will say my own self, that is a line though that I admit that I've sometimes blurred. Sometimes I forget, wait, am I working at 10 p.m. or did I work until 10 p.m.? That is a distinction that I think I've struggled with. I'm wondering if you have any guidance or thoughts for employers. How do they make sure that they really are allowing flexibility that doesn't just mean work more, but instead means work when you are best suited to do so?
So we're seeing a lot of top-down mandates right now. And what we encourage leaders to do is actually think about the principles that you are building your flexible work strategy around and what are the guardrails. Too often we say people need to set their own boundaries. But if they're getting messages from their exec at 11 p.m., it's very hard to set those boundaries. A couple of guardrails as an example are if you are going to be sending a message after 5 p.m., do it as a scheduled send. Schedule it for the next day. Another guardrail that someone can think about is like, hey, we want you to focus on your wellness. So ensure that you have a couple of blocks throughout the day to go for a walk or to eat lunch. Like we encourage that. And it's really important for leaders to set that tone from the top. I can say from my own personal experience early in the pandemic, I used to use my Slack status message to say, I'm going and chasing unicorns with my, at the time, 2-year-old and 4-year-old. Just, just to show like it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to spend time with family. You don't necessarily have to give off the perception that you're working all the time. So those principles, those guardrails, and the importance of executives setting the tone are all three things that we've seen to be effective in terms of changing the shift from being always on to working when works best for you.
I want to move in a moment here to some of those tactics you were touching on, but a couple times now we've referenced parents. So in my own deep self-interest, I want to touch on working parents. I believe you guys have done some research or at least seen some numbers around that. So talk to me a bit about any working parent trends. This has been one example, noting there are many people who warrant flexibility in lots of ways, but it's one subgroup of professionals that we're talking more about. What are you seeing around working professionals in the workplace?
So the percentage of working moms who want location flexibility is at an all-time high, 82%. And in general, we're seeing an increased desire for flexibility, yes, with women with children, as well as with working dads. So it's generally a rising sentiment of we want more flexibility. We don't want to be doing this commute every single day. And it's really important as leaders think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they think about flexibility and future of work planning and diversity, equity, and inclusion go hand in hand. Because the sentiment we're seeing among employees of color, working parents and caregivers, women, is that they want flexible work. What we're also seeing, though, is those who want to go back into the office are typically executives, they're men, they're white employees. And because of that divide, there is a risk of proximity bias. Proximity bias is favoritism towards an employee who is nearby, who is working in the office. And what we don't want to see through this flexibility is that those who are getting promoted, those who are getting those stretch opportunities, are the ones who are in the office every single day, whereas caregivers, working parents, employees of color, they're getting left behind. So leaders need to be very cognizant of how and why they're promoting people, how and why they're offering new opportunities to people beyond that they're proximate.
Well, let's then move into a broader basket of behavior changes you're hoping come both from what you're seeing in pulse surveys in your forthcoming book. What are you hoping? What are some key behavior changes you hope change?
I think the first one is leaders need to trust their employees. The reason why we're seeing such mandates to return back into the office 5 days a week, one is confirmation bias. Leaders are not actually asking their employees what they want. 66% of leaders are not including their broader set of employees in these conversations around return to the office, future of work planning. The second is overall just a general different divergence in experience. Executives just report higher scores in terms of how they're feeling about work relative to their employees. And last but not least, it is about trust. So much of the conversation has been, people need to come back because I need to know that they're working. Or people need to come back because they're not responding to my messages quickly enough. And the last 2 years have proven anything is that people can work on their terms. And we've seen businesses thrive during this time. So it's really important for us to shift from we need people in the office because we need to see that they're working to let's ask for their feedback. Let's be transparent about our decisions. And let's also make sure that we have measures in place in terms of what people are responsible for producing versus they should get promoted because they are in the office 5 days a week or they're working nonstop between these hours.
Let me throw a couple real examples that I bumped into in my own reporting and speaking to companies who are navigating this.
Sure.
One, I try to remind myself that we have seen a remarkable surge in remote work. I think it's something like a tripling in the number of hours we're expecting, but most work hours are still expected to remain in office. We technically cover a lot of tech and tech-enabled companies, so our company mix is probably a little higher on the remote friendly dynamic, but we still talk to lots of companies that are doing some navigation of office time. One example that I've heard a few different times in a few different ways for companies is what I perceive to be a pretty genuine interest in offering flexibility, and maybe this relates to both schedule and location flexibility. But they also recognize if an office is going to be helpful, it's probably if a good portion of people there in the same time, which then, of course, almost by definition, is some erasure of schedule and location flexibility, because someone is saying, hey, from Tuesdays at 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., we really want everyone in the office because we want Tuesdays to be a really effective day in the office. Just curious if you have any thoughts or anything you've seen around how you do that effectively and do that well, assuming someone is doing it for the right reasons. I want this to be a dynamic space, not I want to look over your shoulder.
Yes. And I love the word that you used just now in terms of effective. So first of all, what does effective mean for your team? Is the time in the office meant to do focused work where everybody has their headphones on and are just doing their individual work that they could do at home? Or is this an opportunity for you to come together, to collaborate, to build those bonds, to foster camaraderie across the team? Because what we're seeing, like flexible work and going digital first, does not mean that the office is dead. It's that the office has a different role for teams. And what we see among employees is that those who want to go back into the office, whether in a hybrid model or full-time, they want to go back to foster those bonds. And so it's really important for leaders to also think about how do we set up the office? How can we actually build out the office to foster that collaboration, to give people space to socialize with one another, to host offsites with large groups of people, rather than that open desk layout where you come in and you do your solo focused work. Many people will go back into the office because they're not comfortable working from home. They absolutely hate it. That's totally fine. It's more figure out, give people the choice as to what works best for them. And as you structure when people come back into the office, give them enough time to make plans around that, and also be really clear as to what you're looking to achieve with that time together. Because you do need to see each other regularly. It's just a question of why and what you're looking to achieve, so that people know what they're going to get out of the experience.
I'm going to lose you in a couple of minutes, but a couple other examples that I'd love to hear your take on, your perspective. One, actually, we at Technically, something that we even are wrestling with, small team of 20. We're a local news organization. We've always typically had a very real footprint in our communities we report on. We've subleased an office and we are fully remote and have been in a formal way and trying to follow many of the best practices we report on. I was super interested in, we've hired for a couple of roles in the last year or so, and the more senior role, our being fully remote, was a huge selling point. And I was super interested that a more junior role we were hiring for, a few of our finalists were actually quite down on that we were fully remote and really wanted office time. And some of that I've seen in other research, that actually, despite what we might have thought a couple of years ago, it seems some of our younger early career folks are feeling that they're missing out on something without having an office experience. I'm just wondering if you've seen any intergenerational differences in how people are thinking about remote or flexibility. Is that different by age demographic? Are there any trends like that you're seeing?
So our hypothesis originally was that people who are younger and people who are older in the workforce would both want to come back into the office full time. And we're actually seeing that's not the case across generations, across age groups. We're seeing a consistent desire to have the choice as to what you want to do. One thing that I've seen in terms of what works, especially for the younger demographic who's right out of school, is during your time together in the office, figuring out how to curate collisions is the phrase that we've been using, curate collisions. So to help them meet people outside of their immediate team. And that's through networking. That's even through just randomized pairings of people meeting up for lunch. But when people are in the office together, how can you actually help expand the network of people who are interested in that? And for employees of color, for younger employees, for women, thinking about ways in which you can expand their network and build the ties between teams that you sometimes would get when you were 5 days in the office, in the elevator or at the cafeteria. We just have to be a lot more intentional about what that looks like. And that should be part of really any agenda for a team get together moving forward.
Maybe one last example I'll run through you, and then we'll wrap up with any final thoughts you have. again, we technically cover how tech economies shape the cities they're a part of, and that relationship between definitionally placeless worlds and how they interact with placeful worlds are super interesting to me. How do our tech companies and technologists think about where they live? Um, and one interesting bit around workplace flexibility that's come up that's interested me is particularly some of the large employers we cover, but even some smaller growth stage companies have had these thoughts about what is their relationship to where their office once was. The most literal example is, you know, the food truck our staff used to go to. Are we supposed to feel something about that? This is particularly interested in downtown cores. We've done a fair bit of reporting on how cities have thought about this. And I think it's a lot messier. I'm quite interested in what your view is of how much does a larger employer with thousands of employees in a downtown core is supposed to feel about bringing people back to the office for a civic reason, and even some of the growth stage or smaller companies, what their relationship is to place. It may feel like it's not what a company's meant to think about, but I just wonder if that's come up, or even if just in your own research, if that comes to mind. Do we have to think about where our work gets done in a broader civic lens?
You know, I think that the broader community is a stakeholder for businesses. You need to be thinking about the impact of your decisions, not just on your employees, but the broader organization. I've seen this being used, though, in a way that's not best for the long-term interest, in the sense that people need to come back because we need to support our community. That's not a reason to lure people back into the office. I think that there's, you know, when you are in the office, there's opportunities to encourage, support local businesses, check out that food truck. But saying to people, this mandate is happening across the entire company because of this civic duty, that doesn't necessarily add up in the minds of employees. So I think it's really critical for leaders to not use these carrots of there's a concert, or you get to do a happy hour, or yes, like we need to support the local businesses, and rather figure out like what is working best for employees, and then encouraging that right behavior when they do come together, to ensure that you are fulfilling your civic duty to broader businesses in the area.
Are you optimistic about cities and downtown cores continuing as like economic engines in the way that we've understood it? Are we at a paradigm shift, or is it just going to kind of evolve?
I think it's going to evolve. I think the businesses that are there are going to change. I think even just how people commute in, how they spend their time together when they are together, they will change. But I don't necessarily see cities dying. People are still going to come back into the office. It has a role. It's just there's more flexibility in terms of, again, when and where people work, but the office plays a role. The broader community around that office plays a role. But we may see some shifts in terms of what the composition of the surrounding community may look like in terms of the types of businesses and services people will frequent.
I appreciate that. You let me go a little over. I appreciate that. Anything else? Maybe any little favorite from your pulse survey? Anything that just like stuck out to you as interesting, or even if you don't think it's necessarily the most important, anything that stands out to you as telling or interesting, or has shifted even your own behavior? I'm sure your own work has changed over the last couple of years. Anything that's shifted you?
Yes, I think that in general, we talked a little bit about top-down mandates, but it's been really interesting to see the distinction between the experience of those who are in the office 5 days a week and those who have more flexibility. So we're seeing 2 times a steeper decline in terms of experience scores for those who are in the office 5 days a week. It's been a really tough shift for many people, as they've gone from having more choice to really having no choice. And in the past, management training and leadership training, it's been about you need to be clear on what's important. You need to be clear in terms of what your mandates are. But we've touched on this during this conversation. What people want at this point is that shift in leadership from mandates to transparency. And we also want to see that from their managers, because traditional management training has been, you are a gatekeeper, you need to be on top of everybody's work. And that shift is happening from gatekeeper to a coach, someone who nurtures. And so I think this is a real opportunity for us to think about what a good manager looks like, and what empathy and emotional intelligence in a manager looks like, because that's going to be critical as managers lead bigger and bigger distributed teams. It's a very different measurement mechanism. It's a very different coaching mechanism. And it's going to require investment from executives who are thinking about the overall health of their middle managers and their happiness of that level of people.
Happiness. I like to hear that. Sheela Subramanian, she is a VP of Future Forum at Slack. Sheela, thanks so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. We'll be sure to hear more from Future Forum, whose pulse surveys we find quite interesting, and I'm sure we'll be talking with Sheela again. These are conversations ahead of the Introduce conference on May 12th. You should be there in person in Philadelphia. If not, though, we'll have, this is after the fact, you likely have below here links to other Future Forum research and other coverage from Technically. And I think somewhere like here, there's a video that you can look at all of our introduced videos and other Technically conversations on building better companies. That has been this. We'll see you next time. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.